Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, and I am the host of this podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. I am also a newly minted USA Today best-selling author of the novel Blank. I've created a whole community of book lovers around this podcast, a publishing company, reading retreats, a bookstore, and more. Learn more at zibbymedia.com or follow me on social at Zibby Owens or join the community at Zibby Readers. Rowan Beaird is the author of The DIVORCÉES, a novel. Rowan is a fiction writer whose work has appeared or is forthcoming in the Kenyon Review, the Southern Review, and the Common, among others. She is the recipient of the Ploughshares Emerging Writer Award, and her work has been nominated for a pushcart. She has received scholarships from the Breadloaf Writers Conference and Story Studio, and she currently works at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. This is her first novel. Welcome, Rowan. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss The DIVORCÉES.
Thank you so much for having me. And also, before we get started, I just wanted to say congratulations on Blank. Oh my gosh.
Thank you. That's very sweet of you. Thank you.
Of course.
I know, it's so funny. I've been doing this podcast for, 6 years now. And where the idea that anyone would come on congratulating me in the beginning seems so ludicrous. So it's just, have to take a moment to be like, wow, that's cool.
Yeah, it's amazing. Oh my gosh,
Anyway,
of course.
quite a road, which, as an author, I'm excited to hear more about your road. But anyway, Start by telling everybody what The DIVORCÉES is about, please.
Yeah, of course. So The DIVORCÉES, it's set in 1951, and it's about this sheltered young woman named Lois Saunders who journeys to one of Reno's famous divorce ranches to separate from her husband. And while there, she becomes obsessed with this mysterious, glamorous fellow guest named Greer, who both offers Lois a new life, but also threatens the freedom that she really craves.
So I could not believe, as a divorcee, well, I'm married now. Am I still a divorcee? I was.
It's a good question.
Are you always a former divorcee, I guess?
Former divorcee, ex-divorcee.
Yeah. Ex-divorcee. The idea that there was a time when I would have had to, be whisked off and have to go horseback riding every day just to get through, you know what I mean? All of that and live with a couple other women and just be completely sequestered like a shameful, terrible thing.
Yes.
Is wild. So did this really happen? Where did this come from?
It really happened. So I learned about the existence of divorce ranches, hilariously enough, on my bachelorette weekend in Las Vegas, of all times and places. And we were visiting this place called the Neon Museum. And we had this really amazing tour guide who knew a lot about the history of the state. And she shared that starting in 1931, to help recover from the Great Depression, Nevada made two really important decisions. So one, they legalized gambling. And two, they changed their divorce residency requirements so that, like in the novel, as you know,
yes,
if you moved to the state for just 6 weeks, you could separate from your spouse for pretty much whatever reason, which was radically different than everywhere else in the country at the time. In New York, for example, you could really only separate from your spouse if they committed adultery. You needed proof of it. The judge then could even still deny your claim. And so as a result, Reno, because it was already a tourist destination, it became the divorce capital of the world. And if you were amongst the rich or the famous, when you went to Reno, you'd stay at a divorce ranch, which, as you noted, you'd spend your days riding horses, you'd spend your evenings going to casinos. And when I learned about this, I was just so fascinated by it because it really felt like this lost chapter of history.
Totally. Oh my gosh. But it wasn't everything, because in the book, it's outlined what the acceptable causes are. Right.
Yes.
So including impotence, by the way, how are people proving this? Are they dragging their poor husbands to court? Yeah. Right. Because she was sort of there's no box for he was just an asshole. There was just no box for, I just wasn't in love with him anymore. It had to be something so extreme, and even one of the girls said to the other, well, unspeakable cruel. Why, if he didn't do one of these things, why did you even need to get divorced? Right? Something like that.
Oh, totally. It was really incomprehensible at the time that, as you said, you'd leave your husband just because you didn't want to be married to him anymore, because you didn't love him anymore. Yeah.
Mind blowing.
I know.
What else did you find? Because now I'm totally curious. What else? How many people went through a ranch, and what happened to those people after? Because even in the book, there's this expectation that, well, yeah, this is a stopgap measure until you somehow get in a respectable position again, right? It wasn't supposed to be like, because what is her name, Lois, the main character, suggests that afterwards she's going to just like live by herself. It's completely like scandalous, and they're like, only
people
some
are aghast.
women would ever do that,
Exactly. Well, that was, part of the joy of writing this novel was doing the research. And one of the really incredible resources that I found was created by the University of Nevada, and it's the thing called the Reno Divorce History Project. And as part of that, you can imagine, because of this time period, unfortunately, a lot of the women that went to Reno are no longer with us. But earlier, they had interviewed a lot of these women. And so you can go on this site and read transcripts of women just talking about their time in Reno and what that time was like and what it meant to them. There's also some interviews of, because sometimes women would leave their children at home, but sometimes the children would come with them just because there wasn't alternate childcare. And of course, you couldn't leave the child with the husband. And so there's also interviews with some of the children that are remembering going to Reno for 6 weeks and what sort of sense they made out of it. And, some described it a little bit like summer camp, where it just felt like a vacation, and others understood the gravity of the situation a bit more. But, because of this change in legislation, there was a huge rise in divorces in Nevada, as you can imagine. So thousands of women traveled to Reno to separate from their husbands. And, divorce ranches specifically, as I said before, there were some that catered more to middle-class women, but primarily they were really for the rich and the famous. Actresses like Rita Hayworth went to divorce ranches to separate from their spouses. And so all of those stories were just so incredible to read about. And as you said, some women do frame it like, God, it was just such a relief. I was so ready to leave my husband. And they did find community in these ranches and people that were going through the same sorts of experiences. But like in the novel, so much of what lay ahead of them beyond the ranch was a real unknown. And the options that were open to them were so limited at the time.
I love this whole notion of this blanket term of unspeakable cruelty. And they just throw that out as a, and you're like, well, what does that mean? And, there's all this intrigue and it's terrible. And anyway, I find this absolutely fascinating. Did you think about calling this book The Divorce Ranch? Was that ever a title?
We went through a couple of different titles. I am horrible at titles. I don't know if they come easily to you. No, yeah.
I actually just found an email that I had sent my editor about bookends, and the subject was 8 million ideas, and they were like 200 titles, none of which were bookends.
None of which made it. Yeah. It's so hard. And so I originally, and when it went out on submission, I had just called it the Golden Yarrow, which is the name of the ranch, because when in doubt, I just default to location. So, but yes. And Divorce Ranch, whenever you say those words, people are always immediately intrigued. Like, what could that possibly be? So it would have been a good title.
Well, it's not just the setting and premise of the book that are good, but your writing is beautiful. This is like you're a literary writer. It's a beautiful depiction of all of it, from scenery to relationships to, feeling ousted by your dad and not disappointing your family. And there are all these themes that are relatable, but you write them in a really beautiful way. So then I wasn't surprised to read your bio and be like, oh, okay, all these literary journals and, this award she got and blah, blah, blah. So tell me about your background and how you became a writer.
Yeah. So, I'm lucky in that I've had parents that were always really great readers. And my mom herself is a poet. And so growing up, there was no shortage of books in our house. And that was in many ways how I sort of accessed the larger world. But for a while, I actually thought I was going to be a painter. I really loved fine art. And then in high school, my canvases started slowly becoming lines of poetry and words. And some helpful teachers were like, this actually isn't the field for you. Maybe you should go into the lucrative field of creative writing.
I was going to say, bank on the poetry career. That'll be good.
Exactly. But, I started writing poetry at first, and then kind of gradually started writing short fiction. I went to study English literature in college and really thought I might be a professor, writer in my mind. Even then, I didn't think, well, is this a viable career path? Especially graduating into the recession. I just felt like, I needed some other idea of how to make my way in the world. And so I actually turned to working in nonprofits. I've done mainly communications work and program management work for different arts and education organizations. And I always kept writing throughout it. I would just steal time in the mornings and the evenings and on the weekends, but I could not conceptualize writing a novel. It just felt so overwhelming. The idea of how to structure it, how to pace it, I just felt like my brain didn't work that way. And then, I think like many writers, I do have a failed novel in a drawer that just did not really work out. And that was kind of my first attempt. And I think, it didn't exactly teach me how to write a novel because I think that with each novel, it's just a totally new creative endeavor. But it did teach me that this is something that I was capable of. And so when I had that spark of an idea for the Divorcees, I honestly thought about, God, could this be a short story? Like, is there any way I could kind of, make this into a story? Yeah, exactly, in my comfort zone. But the more time I spent with it, I was just like, gosh, there's just no way. And part of it was because there was just so much there in terms of research, and that part was really exciting. But eventually I sat down and sort of outlined it and structured it. And luckily by that point, I had an agent because of a short fiction contest that I'd won. And, my agents, they've been so helpful in steering this project to what it is today. And same with my wonderful editor at Flatiron, Carolyn Bleakey. But I'm honestly kind of still in shock that I wrote a novel and that it's out in the world and that I'm talking to you right now.
Wait, so go back to the novel that ended up not selling. What was that about? And what was that process like versus this one in terms of time or anything that you attacked it differently?
I definitely spent less time on it. It was much more of a quiet family drama. It was about the relationship between two siblings and a brother who goes missing in a national park. And I, I still feel a little bit attached to it. Every once in a while in the back of my head, I'm like, gosh, should I go back to that? But I think that why I eventually abandoned it, and we didn't even send it out. It was a sort of thing where my agent came back with some notes, and going through her feedback, I just realized that I didn't have an ideal version of the book in my head. Like I couldn't figure out what I was really working towards. And even when the Divorcees
never
was a
good.
Mess, yes, exactly. It's like, it's not just that the road is hard. It's just, you can't see the road. You're just like, I don't really know how to do this. And I just never felt like that with the Divorcees. I always felt like, okay, I know what I want this to be. I'm not there yet, but I have an idea of the shape of it. And so I don't know. I think that novel might just stay in a drawer. I feel like it is a bit of a rite of passage.
And tell me about the contest that you won.
Yeah, so that was through Plowshares, which, it's this literary journal out of Boston. And gosh, that just felt like such an incredible stroke of luck. It was the short story that I'd been working on that was about the, very unsexy topics of grief and moving forward in life. And I'm not a very fast writer. I move very slowly, and I put so much time and thought and effort into this short story. And, I kind of just sent it out on a whim. It's this contest called the Emerging Writer Contest. And this writer that I love, Garth Greenwell, was judging it. And so a part of me thought, God, if I could even just get to the point where he reads that story, that would mean the world.
Wow.
And so when I got the email that he had selected it was, full body shock. I still remember I was at work and I was sitting next to a coworker and I just let out this like huge and take a breath. And they were like, oh my gosh, is everything okay? What happened? But that was really kind of a life-changing moment because it got more people to read my work and agents started reaching out and all of a sudden just this door opened. So that was pretty incredible.
I think that's something we don't give enough advice to young writers about is entering contests.
Yes.
Almost nobody ends up saying that as advice, but it really can help. I've had a number of people who have won like a pitch contest or a short story contest or whatever, national writing, whatever, I don't know. And that's it. Like that's one path to discovery. It's not like a sure thing, but
no, of course.
Someone's got to win.
Exactly. And yeah, I mean, I always tell people, and sometimes I do think of that as a sliding doors moment. What if I was just like, oh, this isn't worth it? There's always entry fees,
Yep.
and I don't know what are the odds out of thousands of people I could win, but as you said, somebody has to, and it really was life-changing.
That's amazing. Sliding Doors is like my favorite movie.
Oh, so good. I just rewatched it.
I did too. I rewatched it. I was like, wow, has this held up over time? I showed my kids. I'm like, this is so important because this is like life.
Oh, it's so true. I think about it so often.
Yeah, me too. All these little tiny decisions that just set off our lives in different ways.
Yes.
So you spoke about writing slowly. Your sentences themselves are beautiful. And, the fact that you have a poet as a mom and all of that is not a surprise. Is it slow because you're taking your time and perfecting each sentence? And then do you let yourself just like delete them after? I mean, I try to plow through as fast as humanly possible.
Yeah. I get that.
Like, I just need more words.
I know. Yeah. And I have had to get to a point where I've actually set myself word count goals to kind of get over the feeling of preciousness that I do feel like sometimes I have with my work, because as you said, you get to a point where you do just have to cut a lot. And when I was, younger at an early stage of my writing journey, it was so difficult to do that because I just knew the amount of time that I had put into those sentences, and I just became so attached to them that I was evaluating the prose itself and not what it was doing for the engine of the story. And so that was, I think, so much of the work of writing this novel. And partially, I mean, I have to credit the other writers who gave me feedback and my agents and, my wonderful editor who helped me, because you do just get really attached to things. Because I do, I mean, I sit down and there are days where I write for 2 hours and I've written a paragraph and a half, and I don't necessarily feel great about that. That doesn't always feel productive and positive. But I have been trying to push myself to again just think about, okay, what is this paragraph doing in service of the story? What is it doing in service of the characters? I love atmospheric writing. I love really beautiful, powerful prose, but more than anything else, I mean, I'm drawn to a novel because of its story. And so that's a lot of the work of, I think, shifting to novel writing is really putting that front and center, and knowing that, as the famous line goes, you have to kill your darlings and just be pretty ruthless when it comes to the editing process.
Yes. Amazing. You mentioned a short story about grief. What has your experience with grief been like?
Gosh, it's really evolved. I think that my most difficult grieving process was actually during the pandemic. So I'm profoundly lucky in that, my parents are still with us. I haven't lost anybody really early in their lives. I had to go through obviously the process of, at this point in my life, losing my grandparents and people like that were really important to me. But the most profound grief that I've experienced during the pandemic, I was trying to get pregnant. And during that process, I had, unfortunately, 2 pregnancy losses. So 2 miscarriages, within 6 months. And I'm so lucky in that I now have a beautiful, almost 2-year-old daughter who, insanely enough, I actually gave birth to her the day after this book went out to editors.
Oh my gosh.
So she is, I mean, so closely linked in my mind in terms of the gestation of this project, because I was gestating her along with it. But I think that really acquainted me with a new type of grief that felt really all-consuming. And I think that before that process, I subscribed to the idea of you go through grief in stages, and it's this linear process. And eventually, if you put enough work into processing this loss, you'll come out the other end. And now what I've realized, and especially as I've talked more to people I know that have lost really close loved ones or that have had similar losses to me, it's that you are cycling through those stages all of the time at any given moment. And sometimes you wake up and you realize that you've taken 4 steps backward, and you have to make peace with that and give yourself grace, because there are moments where you wake up and all of a sudden it feels like the day after you experience that loss, and that's okay. And that's part of the process as well. So that's been a really transformational kind of part of my journey as a human, and they kind of go in parallel to my journey as a writer a lot of the time. But yeah.
Well, I'm very sorry. Very, very sorry you had to go through that.
Oh, thank you. I know it's, I think that the other powerful part of that was just realizing how many women have gone through the exact same thing. And I think I've made a lot of really deep connections with people through it. So I never want to say I'm grateful for having gone through that, because I don't wish that on anybody, but I do think that it was kind of transformational in its own way.
How far along were you each time? You don't have to say.
Oh, no, it's fine. I was lucky in that, it's so odd to use the words lucky when talking about these sorts of things, but I was in my first trimester for both. So I was about 8 and 6 weeks, but yeah.
The worst. I'm so sorry.
It is. Oh, thank you.
Well, what are you working on now?
So I did not do this intentionally, but I am working on a wedding novel.
Oh,
from divorce to a wedding.
I know your husband. I don't know. I assume are you married? Shouldn't.
Yes, we're still married.
Okay. All right.
But, I've always wanted to set a novel over the course of a wedding weekend. I think, as you know, that's just such a charged time. And it's a moment in your life, a rare moment when, everyone everyone you've ever loved is all on one roof with you. And so, luckily, or at least as far as I know, people were very supportive of my marriage and wanted me to get married. But I wanted to write about a marriage that not everybody was supportive of, and sort of the idea of that lit match of what if it's, a marriage that all of your loved ones have questions about, and kind of what could unfold then. So
interesting.
I would never want to say writing is fun, because it's work. There's joy to be had in it, but for me, it's often difficult and arduous in its own way, but I am finding joy in just writing again. As you know, sometimes the process of promoting a book, it can make you feel separate from the actual work itself. So it's been nice to just kind of get back to the page.
Maybe you should call the next one The Fiancés. The DIVORCÉES and The Fiancés.
I would love that. Next to a bookshelf together, those would look good.
Right? Then you can have like a trilogy. What could the third one be?
I know. What is the
Fiancés,
third one?
The DIVORCÉES, I don't know.
The wives, the husbands.
I know, but that doesn't sound good.
I know.
I don't know. We'll both have to think about it.
Yeah. Exactly. We'll get there.
Yeah. What else ends in that,
I know. That's it, with that accent.
Yeah. Okay. I'm wasting time here.
Thinking caps on. Yeah.
Immigrés? What about the Immigrés?
Oh, yes.
That could be good.
That could be a great
Not wedding related, but
still. But
we got the E's. Yeah. Okay. Anyway,
exactly. We've done.
You could have a website that's just like the EES.
Yes. My domain.
Okay. What is your advice for aspiring authors?
Gosh, the first two things that I think of: one, get comfortable with rejection. Rejection, as you know, it's such a part of everybody's journey. And I think you have to do two things. Like, one, you have to get comfortable with it. You can't take it personally, but you also have to learn from it. Often I've found really important lessons in the rejections that I've received. And the other thing I'd say is just everybody has to find community. I think that's such a beautiful thing that you've done. You've created such an incredible literary community, and that's just so critical to writers, because so much of the work is solitary. We're alone at our desks, at our computers, or with a piece of paper. And the only way I really think that we can create the sort of work that we want to create is through the encouragement and feedback of fellow writers and also of readers. And I can't imagine this novel, or really any piece of writing I've ever worked on, without the amazing community that I've managed to make for myself over the past, 20 plus years. So I'd say, find your people, and unfortunately get comfortable with rejection.
I love that. Well, congratulations on the DIVORCÉES. This is awesome. And much. I hope that this summer we see a lot of people reenacting this cover, which is a woman in a pool with like this cute string. You can't really see the bikini, but it's like this string bikini with this cool white sunglasses and a book on her head. And I mean, that is just so perfect. I will try to reenact this, but I might I might not feel comfortable showing this to
Yes.
but maybe to you.
If you don't share it on social.
Yeah, not on social. I don't even own a bikini, so let's just leave it at that. Anyway, well, thank you so much, Rowan. It was lovely to meet you.
Oh, thank you so much. This has really been a pleasure and an honor. So thank you.
And hopefully Chicago in May.
Yes, fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Okay. All right. Take care. Have a great day.
Thanks. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. If you love it, please leave a review and follow us on social at Zibby Owens and at Zibby Readers.